background?
Close to people there, and then began to socialize with them. And at the time, for instance, for most of the time at Buckminster, for 4 years, the first 4 years, I had a lover. So it became almost impossible to put the energy into some kind of sham when they came over to my house and met my lover, who became their friend too. You know,
co-worker.
Yeah, right. And that's how that happened. And plus, the atmosphere of the school, from the principal on down, has always been to encourage openness, with the children, child-directed stuff. And it became more and more a conflict for me to be, open on one level and not on another. It seemed silly, It seemed everyone had the right to privacy about their sexuality, and at the same time, going to great pains to hide it, also seemed like an energy drain and rather hypocritical,
Well, why do you think you realized that energy drain when most teachers would never have made that step? They would have.
Oh, well, the kind of relationships I had with like coworkers and stuff, being accepting people, and the kind of people who like to work with kids in a situation where the kids' rights are recognized. If my own acceptance of myself, I guess just a great variety. And being in San Francisco, and the things that make me me, I never had a real formal political consciousness, although I've always had a sense, even as a kid, of, when I was being fucked over, or when somebody else was being, or even when I was fucking myself over somebody else, not being fair, not being really, rotten. So, like just a whole tapestry of things, one thing building on the other.
Mm-hmm.
And also sometimes the silliness, the absurdity of it bothered me. I mean, it seemed obviously that a lot of people were very aware and plugged into other people's sexuality, on one level of reality, and it seemed to me that they realized what I was on that level, and at the same time I wasn't acknowledging it. And I had a lot of friends, straight friends, who shared a lot of intimacies with me, and it always seemed like I would bulk, or not bulk, but kind of block on sharing this one intimacy with them, And some of my friends, 2 or 3, were really exceptional, because it never bothered them, and that was never talked about, because that they kind of realized that's where I was at, and when it came to that time, then it would come to that time. Very, very few people who knew me well were shocked in any way. A couple of people who, on the fringe areas of the school and stuff like that, who I knew from work. I mean, work. There's almost 70 people, 70 adults that's involved in work. They were surprised, not negatively, but just surprised, because they just didn't plug into sexuality. They just assumed that I did what I did at home, and
Right. Were there any negative?
Not to me personally. I think there were 1 or 2 Latino parents who were upset by it, and never followed through on it. Never, and this came to me secondhand. And
how'd they find out?
They would have found out through the newspaper article. And
I don't know about
when we decided to confront the Board of Education on the 2 issues, on not publishing the Gay Teachers Caucus in their newsletter, and then on purposely excluding sexual orientation from the affirmative action policy, I decided to have a that did it. That was the straw. I was really angry to have a press conference concerning that, and then to have a demonstration. And the press conference resulted in a front page story in the Examiner, and other related stories on TV, and a lot of coverage, even in-depth coverage that I was surprised at. Fair coverage sometimes too. Not just the bizarreness of someone being gay, being an elementary teacher.
Right.
And so for those people who didn't know, either through inference or over a long period of time, that's how they found out. And there are lots of people. If there's 363 kids at school, that's 363 families. Obviously, all of those families, some do not know what's happening in the school.
Right.
They'll send their kid and they'll pick him up, and so that's how some people found out, I guess. People I didn't know very well.
Mm-hmm.
And aside from that, the phone calls are all very supportive, Yeah, or
There
people,
were direct phone calls to you?
yeah, saying, right on, or saying, I'm in this situation in this small town, and I'm glad for what you did. It's given, it's made me feel better. However, I still can't come out, this kind of thing.
There were people who read the Examiner?
Yeah, specifically. Yeah, specifically the Examiner, I think. And then the TV. There was a radio program. I don't know the name of it. It's a call-in, and it deals with issues like gay issues, things like this. And they got some negative reactions from some Christian groups or people representing one or two, saying it's disgusting what happened up in San Francisco. A teacher on the front page, this kind of thing. This was all related to me secondhand, but I was never confronted. What's his name? Eugene Hoppe. Is kind of a very conservative loner on the Board of Education, and he said, to his surprise, that none of his constituency called him up to give him any negative feedback.
And he would have been the most likely to have.
Well, he came out, in favor of gays in teaching, which shocked everyone. Even so, yeah, he kind of co-opted the Jesuit priest. The feeling was in calling the board members that he always made his own decisions anyway, and most of the board members just, and so he came to this decision, based on the psychiatrist report, which is in some ways fallacious to some people's thinking. Because, for instance, it didn't deal with people who work with kids on preschool, because he felt that rather rigidly that sexuality was determined by 5, magic birthday or something. So we were chagrined at that, but at the same time, okay, it's fallacious, but it's a yes vote.
It seemed to me
has been homosexual since I've been about 2 years old. I became aware of my sexuality, period. So it was very belated. Coming out, yeah, it wasn't parallel, yeah, by any means.
Why don't you talk about that in as much detail as you can remember in your earliest sexual feelings? And
they were. I think my earliest sexual feelings were were not very clear as far as what they were, what I was mixing. There was definite interrelations, like with acceptance and wanting to be loved and wanting to be touched, which didn't always come down, or being touched too much, this kind of thing. I think since preschool, definitely, I felt an attraction to men, and actively sought that. Meeting sexual encounters, from the time I was 6 or 7 years old.
How were they different from other boys' doctor games?
Well, because I felt at the time, even though some of the stuff felt good, that I was doing something wrong and forbidden, which may not be that much different, if kids do that on the sly anyway. Sexuality traumatizes everybody except kids, with kids. So, on that level, probably wasn't that much different. Of course, the older you got, the more unacceptable it became, and then the more I became more, introverted about my true feelings, and a little more sneakier.
Were there any incidents that you can remember that caused that feeling of introversion, or that need to be introverted?
Oh, you mean in the sense of like being caught, or this kind of thing? Nothing particular. Just in general, the way it was treated. And picking up from family conversations and attitudes, plus whatever was happening in the media at the time, that this just wasn't a thing that was done. I did like to play with dolls. I did like to dress up, and that was but not. And that was treated as a novelty, but it soon became funny. But it soon became clear to me that they weren't laughing at the same things I was enjoying. Also, little girls like to do a lot of things that I'd like to do, and little boys like to do some things that I didn't want to do. And I fought that, and subsequently was either made the object of jokes or treated kind of like, freaky in a way. Well, the athletics especially, I think that's the biggest penalizer. It's not enough to be interested in sports. You have to be, which I think everybody has like a natural thing for, in the sense of all kids like to run, all kids like to jump, unless they have a physical handicap. And even then, I had a patch over my eye, and I did, my socialization skills, needed outlets and stuff like that. But my particular interest didn't lie in being really super competitive and perhaps hitting a ball. So it made a lot of other people happy. It seems like some of the girls' games were less competitive, jump rope and stuff like that. So naturally, I felt more comfortable. I don't agree with people that there are certain games for boys and certain games for girls at all, but that's the way it came down. And then when you express an interest or fight for your interest, they say, see, he's weird because he's not into the prescribed games or the way, I'm sure softball is a lot of fun, but not the way it comes down with it.
Cause and effect.
Right.
Mixing the two.
Right. So that was one definite way, the interest in athletics. And all the male models.
By the other boys? Or?
Sometimes, yeah. I've always been very verbal, and I've never taken much shit. Although I do get the shit beat out of me because of a big mouth, and I didn't like it. I mean, I always felt uncomfortable on the playground. Always, even when I had friends, I just always felt that I wasn't doing what I should be doing. I shouldn't be sitting and rapping. I should be into this heavy macho handball, whatever it was. And I really did hate sports, and I compromised myself by pretending that I did like them, and that made it worse. And all the male models were into sports and spent hours on going to baseball games or listening, and they bored the shit out of me, but I was afraid to say they bored the shit out of me. So that became like another conflict. And basically what happened is I felt ashamed of the things I liked, and not see beyond the sexuality part, the roles, became ashamed of the kind of activities I liked, and found it very hard to share, my like for other people, because I felt, boys aren't supposed to like this kind of thing, and I was very unhappy in school, even in the classroom, not just athletic stuff. As a reason, partially because of how school is, so prison-like anyway, and not respecting individual differences. And I didn't even do well academically. It wasn't even a case of being a little bookworm. That stereotype wasn't there. I didn't do good academically or well academically until I was in high school. For the most part, I found school a very unhappy situation, and I developed a lot of survival skills, which sometimes were not attractive. But have a very biting tongue, being very satirical towards people, becoming very cynical, having such a rotten self-image, so a need to put myself down as a source of humor, seeking ways of negative reinforcement, because at least I was getting paid attention to, even though it was, in a negative way.
Talk more about that. It sounds to me very much like sort of drag behavior. Similar reasons, even if that's not what it was. Do you think that?
What do you mean by drag behavior?
Well, or effeminate behavior, extremely effeminate behavior. Learned sort of effeminate behavior. I never heard the term survival technique, but it sounds to me like by becoming the buffoon, or by saying, yes, you're right, I am this, and then becoming it, you were surviving, but you were also becoming who they want you to become.
Yeah, perhaps, right, which is someone who would be, inferior, this kind of thing. And it's unfortunate that those kind of techniques are termed or considered, feminine, when they're techniques utilized by all human beings, depending on the society and the circumstances.
Tell me more about them, or in your case, what they were, how they manifested.
Well, I became exceedingly verbal, and got a lot into fantasizing and lying about some of the things I did, about my home situation, especially early in grammar school, faking it with girls, faking an interest with girls, became very obsessed with sex, as a lot of Catholic school kids did too, and then with the double whammy of being gay. So I could always talk about sex, always do double entendres about sex, this kind of thing. It could always be counted to put somebody down, and always be counted to have like the last answer, this kind of thing, I feared what they knew and thought about me, and I made them fear me by, not wanting to, mess with me too much. Although I always was highly intimidated by physical violence, and never was a physical fighter. And when those occurrences did happen, I would always lose quite badly and always be very intimidated the next time. And did a lot of, perhaps trashing people like behind their backs, that kind of stuff, as opposed to confronting. I wasn't, and very, very ashamed of my feelings. very, very ashamed of my feelings.
What?
Anything, feeling good, do want to feel good, feeling tender or loving towards someone, whether it be a little boy or a little girl, and as you say, letting my role be defined for me, and not trying to break out of it. And I feel now, looking back, there was some acceptance extended towards me by kids I knew and stuff like that, but I wouldn't truck with that acceptance. I would deny that acceptance, that kind of thing. And putting a lot of energy, especially as I became, got into puberty and stuff, into my sexuality and into sex, a lot more, being so repressed, not only in school and family, but society in general, especially about the gay thing. You had a lot less to be ashamed, feeling a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, almost guilt by osmosis.
Did you have sex pretty much continuously with men, or did you start having it again in high school?
I was pretty much continuously, and I was always the aggressive one, especially not always, but most of the time, especially in grammar school and stuff. Most kids are interested in experimenting with sex, and it feels good. And if the external guilt and stuff could be removed, it's a very healthy thing. But when you're doing it and thinking it's not healthy, but you like it, then it becomes perversion. Not because it is per se, but because it's been treated that way.
Mm-hmm.
Again, letting some other values, define what's happening. And always underneath all this muddledness of guilt and stuff was a sense of being victimized, although I never really verbalized that in my mind or consciously thought of it that way. Mm-hmm. And that I was really getting fucked over. That, deep down inside, I knew if I don't like football, that doesn't make me not worth this, this kind of stuff, But finding no support anywhere, that's a real strong sense of alienation, of really being different and out, not necessarily being the only person who was gay. I don't think I ever thought of it in those terms, being the only person who was like me and therefore had a lot to hide, and feeling super, super frustrated in being able to express myself in ways that I like, body movement, and always having to be very careful, and especially becoming very sexist, because obviously I was heavily penalized by sexism, and I in turn became very, very sexist. And by trashing guys who I thought were effeminate, by picking up right away, overreacting to that, thinking this one's gay, this one's not gay, looking for it, high school, even a little bit, probably junior high, and then into my adult life, completely overreaction, to that kind of thing.
Tell me about the sexual. How did you have sexual experiences in high school? How did you find it?
Well, I would become interested, and they weren't as frequent as I liked, because the high school was a little bigger, and got a little more intimidating as far as the macho games and stuff. So you couldn't kind of kind of reveal yourself in certain ways. Being interested in someone because of a physical attraction, and then pursuing it over, if I could have put as much energy into ballet or something, maybe now I'd be a Nuria, or at least, that I did into seducing, kids that were my age or younger or older, and then there's always the comic book stuff. I would hitchhike. I knew, like if I hitchhiked, there would be a good chance of perhaps being picked up and having sex, and that's why I used to hitchhike. Out and out. Period. That's all there was to that.
And it was successful.
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes I never felt fully. When you're so obsessed with sex and have all these other feelings about it, it's a built-in prophecy that you'll never feel satisfied because you never could. So I never did, even when it was frequent, which it seemed to me there were very long, what gay people refer to as dry periods. And then there's this other irony where you could go, like I lived near New York, so I could go to New York and go to areas that I heard were kind of gay through the grapevine or in stories and stuff, and be so intimidated that I really didn't stick around those areas, where I could have had probably like a nice healthy relationship with another gay person, or if somebody came on to me like getting nervous and walking away, and then really regretting it, like, geez, why did I do that? If I'd only, So in that way, being a teenager wasn't so much more different than it being like a straight teenager, because I know they always felt, my friends seemed to be just as frustrated, and heavily into masturbation and buying books and this kind of stuff. Sex became something that was not gratifying or pleasurable only, but became something really out of proportion and worth, And my orientation put a specialization on it, but that part didn't seem to be as different as the one. And obviously, I knew I wasn't going to get married early, and to relieve that, like a lot of guys I know did, got married when they were 19 or 20, specifically because then it made it okay to have continuous sex. They didn't have to hunt it up all the time. This was in the 50s and 60s. I was 63. I was in college. 59. I graduated from high school. So the sexual revolution hadn't really begun, even in a highly urban, progressive area like New Jersey, New York.
Were any of your sexual advances ever really rebuked?
Yeah. Sometimes out and out, and sometimes it would be that they weren't into it somehow. The vibes were, and guys would be embarrassed and stuff. And then the next thing I knew, they would have told people, which to me was at the time a very big humiliation. I really had a great deal of trouble dealing with it, and I can only attribute my own strength and this little glimmering of some positiveness I had about myself for getting through it. Because, peer pressure in high school was very heavy, and name calling and this kind of stuff. And when I was confronted with that, I confronted it back. But it cost me a lot. It just, I would say, for instance, one time at a table, they'd say, "You're going to move because we don't want to sit with you." I guess it was guys on the football team. And I said, "I'm not going to move." Although inside I was nothing but putty. I really didn't know what was going to happen. But I didn't move. And most of the reason I didn't move wasn't because I was so afraid, because I was scared shitless even to leave, And they finally had to stop for whatever reason. Now, sometimes with gay people, this stuff is really followed through. And so I had a victory in a sense of here. Like, so I got to sit at that table. I never went back to that table, by the way, after that day. But what it cost me inside to do, I can still recollect that feeling, squeamishness and complete fear. And the thing was that these guys were right. That was the thing. In my mind at the time, well, I was queer and I shouldn't be sitting there with them. I don't blame them. But at the same time, stay because I knew I had a right to. It sounds contradictory, but that's what life is all about. And a great deal of anguish about that. Lots and lots of anguish about that.
What toll do you think that's had on you now?
Well, it probably still makes me somewhat, a toll, yes, but now it's like turning those things into something positive, So a great deal of frustrated rage and anger and misplaced anger at all kinds of things, never really dealing with the issue, Now I think I'm more in touch with, as we were talking about before, with that anger and channeling it into things that are not destructive for me or for my brothers and sisters either, And it gave me a lot of chutzpah, I think, a lot of guts, to do certain things that I don't really think are gutsy, but like I do them,
What other specific incidents can you remember, like sitting at the table?
There was a gang. The 50s were fabulous. It was called the Park Street Nights, and it was in Montclair, New Jersey, and there was this little diner called the Park Street Diner. Montclair is like a fairly wealthy town, and then there's the people who service the wealthy people. This is the part of the town that serviced the wealthy people. And this must have been about 10 guys, teenage guys, and I was in this gang, and I was playing my role of the comic, Like when it came to rumbles and stuff like that, I always tried to go home. There really wasn't a big time gang, they really emulated what was happening, but they wore black leather jackets, and we all swaggered around, and I weighed 82 pounds and drank, not Ripple, what the hell was it then? Thunderbird. And once somebody brought a gun, I almost, I was really more afraid of my father and mother than I was of the cops. And these guys were rough, and very, very, very cynical. They didn't like anything. Everything was made fun of. And I had sex a couple of times with one of the kind of leaders of the gang. He was physically attractive. He was also, a prick. And the sex was gratifying because it was sex, finally some sex, wow. But it was also kind of humiliating. And as a reaction to his own sexuality, because he got into it, he put me down and told other people in the gang and stuff like that. So a couple of them tried to make advances to me, and I wasn't interested in them at all, and I knew why they were doing that, And one time I overheard a phone conversation that really blew me away because they were talking about this big thing I thought was this big secret, That's the other game you play, thinking it's a big secret and denying it. I once said if people could beat me up and I would deny that I was gay. I once remember saying that to somebody. I'm surprised I even had that out front of conversation, really. It was probably in, complete hysteria that I said it. So as a result, they asked me not to be in the gang, very bluntly, so we don't want any queers around. And I remember before that happened, I went to the place where this guy worked, and I was a complete wreck. And I said, look, I don't want you saying these things because it really upsets me. I don't think it's fair, or something like that. I mean, I actually went to him. And now, I went to him. I guess what I really wanted to do was beat him up, but I couldn't, I didn't feel I could. And besides, I felt this thing, well, he was a little bit right. I was a little weird. So I said, don't do this to me or something like that. Well, of course, he completely ignored that, being Studs Lonigan, And so that was pretty traumatic, although it gave me some relief because then I didn't have to play any more games with that particular gang. And right after that, I was going to go into college. This happened about junior, senior year. I was very intimidated. I lived with the anxiety, God, they're going to tell everybody. My brother was about 10 years older, and he was in another gang that he's going to know. And the kids at the high school are going to know, or this kind of stuff. And I don't know if that really happened or not. It seemed to me now, my sense of reality was pretty distorted. Like if I saw them on the street, I would walk the other way, this kind of thing. But they had known for so long before that. And in a way, we're just playing out a little game. Had I stuck it out with them, well, I'm glad I didn't. I think it would have almost been accepted in a way that things were accepted in those days, crazily enough, So I was heavily penalizing myself as well as being penalized, Other things that made the sexuality seem very important. And then the sexuality for me, became a smokescreen. Then everything that was wrong was because of that. And in a sense, the energy drain, that was right. But it became a smokescreen for other things that maybe didn't have that much to do with sexuality. Other weaknesses or inadequacy.
When was the first time you knew you were friends with a gay person? I mean, lovers necessarily, to identify with other gay people that you found themselves?
Well, sometimes I would strive for that in unconscious ways during college when I really sensed someone was gay. And most of the time get rebuked because people were very uptight. But I probably really wanted a gay friend. That would have really been nice, to carry on, to do whatever, to have confidences. It didn't happen until I came to San Francisco. And I was...
Didn't happen through 4 years of college?
No, it didn't happen through 4 years of college. Didn't happen out here. I was about 23, I guess, and coincidentally, I kind of lived in this commune with a bunch of people. Two of the guys were gay, and it really, it was this whole number again of when I found that out, it was okay for them to know I was gay, but I really didn't want them to tell anybody else. Everybody else knew, this kind of number. But because of my reservedness and not being able to accept my sexuality very well, we were friends, but on a very limited basis, you know what I mean? It wasn't until after I went to Vietnam and came back, and I was already like 27, 28, and I started to go to the bars, that I met my first gay friend, and since then I've had a lot of gay friends. But that was my first real ongoing kind of non-sexual, friend. We weren't very political, but we were in the sense that you do give each other support, and then through him and other people, I met other people, gay people to socialize with. Silly that I hung around. I wasn't going to invite them to, a party because there'd be a few people there who were gay, and I was nervous about that, but I did it, and it's kind of that kind of progression.
You eventually see yourself in a relationship with a woman, perhaps?
You mean now? Yeah, I feel. I think so. Yeah. That's been a big a problem for some gay people, like for a long time. Because as I say, you let the other things define you. So if I'm gay, this is what it must mean. I always feel